Okay, hello and welcome to the colloquium for Mathematics for Public Health. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the land on which Fields Institute operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And I will now hand over to Professor Jianhong Wu, who will introduce our speaker today.
Thank you. Good day, and I'm very happy Professor Velasco-Hernandez is with us today. Jorge is well known to the mathematical biology community. It's a leading figure in the general community, but in general, the Mexican mathematical biology in particular. And Jose is from the Institute of Mathematics and National University of Autónoma, Mexico. I tweeted his talk yesterday. This is really a Mexican experience for a research, a global leader working in Mexico. So Jorge, now it's time for you. Thank you again.
Thank you. So shall I share the screen? Yep, okay. Then this is it, and let's start. Let me get this ready. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to tell you a little story about what we have been doing in Mexico since early 2020. The title is based on the first paper we published on that. That was the first paper published in a research journal for the epidemic in Mexico. It got some attention, but then got obviously changes because the epidemic evolved. We got more knowledge about the epidemic. And I will tell you a little story about that. Let me now just set my time because I don't want to run off time. Okay, then let me start then. No, it doesn't work. There it is. These are some graphs on the epidemics of Mexico up to April, late March this year. So what you see here in the left panel is the data. I will tell you about more that later or in a moment. These here are some estimations of reproductive number and the true number of cases using a model. And this is the one, this is for the Mexico the country, and this is the epidemic curve of Mexico City. It has particularities that I will comment on as we go on, but essentially is characterized by a very long plateau and then the growth of the epidemic. So we have the following information general that compares very well with other parts of the world, but specific for Mexico, the first case was on February 8. The schools closed on March 15. The partial lockdown was in effect on March 23rd. I was starting my sabbatical in Miami and I had to come home on March 18. I had to cancel that. So that was the impact, the first impact of the epidemic on my personal life, but that happens. And one of the characteristics of the epidemic in Mexico is the regional and the particular context in which it developed. We have limited testing, only testing those that arrive to the health centers and the hospitals, no contact tracing, a large underreporting of cases and deaths. The excess mortality in Mexico is really large. The official estimate of deaths is up there of the whole epidemic is below 500,000 people, but the expected excess deaths at the end resulted in twice that amount of people. We used a Sentinel model for surveillance that was designed for the H1N1 after the H1N1 epidemic in 2009, and the health authorities refused to change that Sentinel model that was very quickly overwhelmed with the cases, the number of cases that SARS brought with it. The other characteristic is that in Mexico, 50% of more of the population lives in the informal economy. So the particular problem of closures and lockdowns was very serious. Still, we are having a lot of impact on that, because that most of the population needs to go to the street to work. Otherwise, no money, no food for the day. That's the reality of this country, and depending on the region, but essentially that's the problem. So in the beginning, we had a model from the government. I will comment a little bit more on that model later. But the mainly point is that what the mathematicians that were working with that model were doing really fitting a Kerman-McKendrick model to the data of Wuhan, to the data of Spain, to the data of Italy, where the epidemic and the lockdowns were very strict. And also they were using essentially a step function for the contact rate. So the contact rate before the lockdown instruction was 1, then it jumped and it was decreased. That was the main idea. This, as a math epidemiologist here in Mexico, and my group, that was not a very good idea for us. And we started then to work in this model, in which the first thing is that the effective contact rate is not a jump, but is rather a learning curve. That was our first idea, in which you have in this red interval the time between the delay between the first case and the application of the mitigation measures, and that gives you the original contact rate with which the epidemic started. Then when you implement those measures, it is a decrease, but it's slow decrease until you hit a target, let's say, reduction. So the parameters here are alpha, the expected proportion of contact rate reduction. So BK is the contact rate, alpha BK is the reduction. An expected time to achieve that reduction, that is theta, that is this one. And as I commented before, the delay in the applications of the non-pharmaceutical information. So that's the idea. Then the data that we used was those that were coming from the reference. We estimated some of them, the ones that are here. We estimated the basic reproductive number and all these parameters that at the beginning of the epidemic in the whole world were a problem. There were many papers on those. And the realities is of the model, the things that were confronted by the models are the ones that I put here. First, there was a partial adherence to MPIs. Not everybody complied because of the particular economic situation of the country. There were differences in effective contact rates. That's a hypothesis between symptomatic and asymptomatic cases. Sorry, I missed an A here. So asymptomatic cases. Then we assume that a fraction of the population, in particular in Mexico City, complied with the lockdown, and 1 minus Q, the rest of the population did not comply with the enclosure. So this was essentially a voluntary lockdown. And then we postulate that people got tired of that. People needed to go out to work. And there was a certain rate of abandonment of the NPIs from those that at the beginning complied with the lockdown and later defaulted. So the model, this is the original diagram that we use in the model. As you see, is very, very bad, but we were in a hurry. We wanted to publish this quickly, and it's a very ugly diagram, but I will show you a better one later. But essentially, what we consider was the following scenario. We have a typical SEIR model in which we had two types of symptomatic of cases, symptomatic and asymptomatic. Then at a given time, when the lockdown was instituted by the government, a certain proportion of the population Q went into the lockdown. They followed their own dynamic. And 1 minus Q went to the other dynamic, no compliance or reduced compliance with the lockdowns. We assume that in each population, those that complying and those that are not complying, had different contact rates for symptomatic and asymptomatic. And this is the essential diagram for that. We didn't consider, of course, demographics here. Is a typical Kerr-McKendrick model, but divided into two parts. The innovation here, if any, is the fact that we use this splitting of populations. The other is that we have these time-dependent effective contact rates for people in closure and with outside closure. And we also had this omega, this rate of the faulting of the compliance. So people in one of these compartments, say, defaults and starts to behave like the other people that is not obeying the lockdown, and they adopt those effective contact rates. This is the essential structure of the model. So with that, this is published in this paper here. With that, a brief summary of the results, brief because I want to go on and to show you how we try to improve on this model. But essentially, we have two parameters of importance. One is Q, which is the proportion of the people that goes into lockdown. And the other is omega, which is the rate at which the people in the lockdown compartment defaults and goes to the other. And what we found very quickly is that there exists a balance between these two factors. And these two factors gives us a optimal, I don't want to call it, a minimum for the prevalence of the disease or incidence of the disease, and that was for the data we have around Q equals 0.7. So 70% of the people closing in the enclosure and 30% outside, then that gives us the best possible scenario in which you have the lowest possible achievable reductions of infection. That was one result. The other result was when the peak was to be reached. As in many parts of the world, one of the main concerns in Mexico was when the epidemic will end and when the peak there will be. The official model, and this was a matter of jokes later in the epidemic, sadly, because it should have worked, the model, but the model predicted a peak around May 8 and the end of the epidemic in June 26, which obviously did not happen. And this was the first model that was published that showed that not only there was this trade-off between compliance, the proportion of people complying, and the rate of defaulting, that gave us some idea on the optimal or the best that we could hope in this scenario of not complete compliance of lockdowns. And the other one was these graphs that I'm showing here on the dates of the most likely dates for the peak. And this model showed that it should happen by the end of May 2020, perhaps in the last week, 10 days of the month. The official model, as I said, used a jump discontinuity for the contact rate fitted to Wuhan. The end of the epidemic, the peak of the epidemic at the end was May 8, and the end of lockdown June 1st. These dates were important because they were used to end the official lockdown. And then on June 1st, 2020, a traffic light system of measuring incident, productive number, deaths, hospitalization started to work. So we have red, green, yellow lights, and that was indicating the economic activity that was allowed in Mexico City and elsewhere in the country. So this result was politically not well received, but it was good. It showed to be good at the end, but that's anecdotal. The interesting thing is that we have this thing here, and this made us think about the improvement of the model based on the evidence that we were having. And that was the effect of super spreading events on holidays. I was talking to Sahara, I'm sorry to pronounce your name, but about how Mexicans, we like parties. And what we observed was that I will show you some data in a moment, but this early date of the peak that the government model was showing, we trying to understand why it was so early, this idea. We deduced that it was because they did not consider certain holidays. Mexico, we have in April 30th, the day of the children. Then the 1st of May is the Workers' Day. Then May 3rd is the day of the Holy Cross Day, which is the patron saint of the workers, the builders, workers that work in construction. Then May 10 is Mother's Day, which is here in Mexico a huge festivity, very comparable in terms of that nothing exists like Thanksgiving is the equivalent, and we have it in May. And in these dates were observed were expected actually large movements of people going to visit, to having parties for the children, or the construction worker having these big feasts on the 3rd of May, or people going to visit the grandmother, the grandmother, the mother to their home places in Mexico. So we thought about this and we improved not only the figures, as you can see, which is much nicer, but the model we thought, and in which we have, again, this splitting idea that we think was very good idea. We have at the beginning of the epidemic, a typical SEIR model with 2 types of infected people, but now we incorporated reported cases. I think Yang Hong and others have worked in this reported cases problem. We introduced that new compartment, and the splitting is the same. Q goes to lockdown, one or partial lockdown, 1 minus Q, they go outside. And it again is an SEIR model, but now the reported cases are common to both. This reduces the number of equations. The same hypothesis work. Now we have only one type of contact rate. We don't distinguish except in terms of the color of the compartment. We don't have reduced the number of parameters. And again, in this case, the learning curve for the effective contact rate now had 3 phases, because in the first is when the restrictions start, then it starts in blue, the period of learning, and then the target population. Remember, and this is a criticism that we have received, we don't have much data to estimate these things precisely. And but phenomenologically, it made sense. And I will tell you about an improvement on that. And we kept the lack of compliance, the rate of lack of compliance, this omega, but now it's not constant. We did it time dependent, and essentially a Heaviside function in some sorts is 0 or has a constant value. And then during the holidays, it increases the number of people that leave the safe compartment, the green compartment, and go to the red compartment, the complicated compartment. We have obviously the typical parameters that have many problems in terms of parameter estimation, what data you have, etc., like the proportion of symptomatic to asymptomatic, for example. And we estimated parameters using our data, which is essentially cases and deaths with not much testing and no contact tracing. So that's baseline, that's it. And then we look at this is the reproductive number that is computed using this very popular RT model, the Corey et al. And this is for Mexico City from March, the beginning of March to August. And you can see that in May, I forgot to put some lines here, but this is close up from April, end of April to May 11. And as you can see how the reproduction number, it increased during these holidays. It was up those holidays and then went down. And I didn't put here, but the mortality also increased afterwards. And so we have like a good evidence based on our data, on the computation of the reproductive number, that yes, indeed, we had super spreading events with impact on mortality and a number of cases during these holidays. And then we use our model more in a theoretical, as you can see, what I'm showing you is very pragmatic, but we decided to do some theory on this, some theoretical explorations. And then the blue line is the typical epidemic curve estimated from the data without considering super spreading events on April 30th, May 1st, May 3rd, May 10th, with different scenarios represented by the colored lines, black, red, and yellow, depending on how strong was the rate of failure of compliance and how close or far from the peak given by the baseline, the blue line, was the intervention. And as you can see, this is perhaps even intuitively very believable. If it depends on how strong and when, the point is when you have this jump. So for example, if your jump is only 12 days from the peak, which we thought it was our scenario, we were predicting the peak of the epidemic by late May, and many of these, say May 10, you add 12 and you get 22. So we were thinking this is it. This is the scenario we have, this one here, A below. And you can see that a perturbation of the curve here, May 10, 12 days before peak, depending on the size of the rate of lack of compliance, can give you either a growing epidemic, a late peak, or a plateau. And this we communicated to the government of Mexico City that they should be prepared to have a scenario where the curve will not go down as the government model was predicting, but that it will stay in a plateau, the best scenario, or probably if the control and the education of the people during these holidays was not effective, even growth in the epidemic. Fortunately, it was a plateau. It was a, well, not big hit because really it's a very humble hit, but for us it was good. We got some recognition for this, and then people started consulting, which is what we wanted to be of use for the government in this thing. So this is the effect of changing the compliance rate in different times. We essentially, this is not a fit, this is just to show that if we take into account these special dates, then we can reproduce some of the features of Mexico City in particular, and even make some predictions depending on the contact rate. How was that going to change? We have two graphs here because one is for the people that is complying with the partial lockdown. The others, the black one, is the ones that are not complying, and some worst case scenario in which both of them increase their contact rate by late October, and then we have a problem. And these dates were chosen because the 16th of September, which is the National Day of Mexico, was expected to have a large population. These graphs were made later, but when we did work here on the middle of May, we were thinking that September 16 was going to be a problem. So this is like the second part of the attempts of modeling the epidemic under the conditions that we have. We noticed when we were doing this work that is shown in this graph with blue, that the traffic lights were not having, apparently, they were not having a big impact in the shape of the epidemic. Of course, many people started to put points of change of the contact rate every week or every 2 weeks, and to adjust and estimate the epidemic curve using these points at break points and estimate these things. But we wanted to relate the changes in the contact rate to the super spreading events. And we noticed that the traffic light was not really working. What was working was how close was the change in light to the holiday. And we have, as we were commenting before, many holidays. So we used these ideas to try to improve our estimations, given that people was now putting attention to what we were saying, and improve these things in forecasting a little bit. 1 week, we were not very, how you say, we didn't want to be too excited with the possibility of forecasting. So we limited ourselves to 1 week just to see if it would work. And we reasoned as follows. The application of mitigation strategies, regardless of what you do, these strategies must be based on local factors, and they must combine public health status, economic impact, and political conditions, because it's in everywhere, but in Mexico, these were very important. Apart from the public health interventions relating to the traffic lights and all these things. The other one is that there is a central phenomenon in human behavior, and that is that we like to get together, have parties, and move. And in Mexico in particular, since we didn't have, we still don't have enough testing and contact tracing, the best indicators of heightened mobility were key dates, key calendar dates related to religious, commercial, civic holidays. So I repeat our limitations here, and we are submitting this paper for analysis. It took a long time because we started with this idea. We were happy with it before Omicron, then Omicron came and it was rejected because it just didn't work. So this works without terrible variants, and I will explain what happens with Omicron in a minute. So we use then these holiday events as change points for Mexico and for Peru. One of my associates is a young researcher from Peru, so he got the data, and we use our model, our methodology to compare those two countries, to compare our methodology. So the change points on the effective contact rates are key calendar dates, and we postulate that these in our countries reflect much more clearly the contact rate, the changes in the contact rate, than the changes in the traffic light system and any other surveillance and warning system that the country has. Obviously, this changes very much if you do have enough testing and you have contact tracing, you have much more information. We don't. So we decided to go in this way. And the other thing is that you can do forecasting not from a mathematical model. You know when to expect a high mobility event. We know, for example, that you have a high mobility event on Holy Week vacation. You know, the Children's Day, Mother's Day, National Day, National Hero Benito Juarez Day, the Wise Men Day, etc. You know in advance what to expect in terms of people getting together, because this repeats periodically every year. So we use that information. And this is the model. In this model, this is a very simple model. We developed it when vaccination was already starting, and I will comment on this in a moment. And then we have again our effective contact rates. We assume that vaccine was not fully protective. There are some infections still, even when vaccinated, even before the Omicron. Then we have the same parameter, rho going to symptomatic and 1 minus rho to asymptomatic. You have the people in the hospitals and stuff like that. The main parameters, we still keep the effective contact rate as time dependent with the same idea, but now this is not going to change as a learning as a learning process, but it's going to change based on the key dates in which there are shifts in mobility. And for that, what we did was to use the data from 2020, the relative change in the contact rate during these key calendar dates, and assume that the relative change of the contact rate on 2021 was going to follow the same pattern. Not the same magnitude of change, but the same pattern, subject to the data that we have at that time. The other is alpha is, let me see, I lack a T here, is the number of people that recover or go to the severe case of the disease. This alpha T is also time dependent. And this changes also in each point. So the estimation is based on the 2-time series.
Oh, it looks like we've lost Jorge. So we will, if you just want to hang on, I'll just pause recording.
He's back.
Oh, he's back. Ah, fantastic. We lost you there for a minute.
You're muted, Jorge.
Yeah, so Jorge, we lost you for just 1 minute.
You're muted. You need to
You're
unmute.
muted, Jorge. You're muted. Okay, you.
Ready?
Yeah,
You
here it is.
now?
Well, missed you for about 1 minute, 2 minutes.
Okay. So I was in this slide or before?
You
This
were
is
in
right.
this slide, right?
Okay, then let me just quickly summarize and put this here. So if I summarize this here, we have, I was saying that we have the data on based an estimation of the model, 2-time series, the number of reported cases and deaths. We don't have vaccination because the vaccination database was decided, the government decided not to open it. I will comment on this later because we have 7 different types of vaccines, 7, not many combinations of these vaccines for the reinforcement and for the 3rd doses. We don't vaccinate children. So it's a problem, a mess actually. But I was commenting that we have the estimation of beta, which is done in the change points given by the key calendar dates, and alpha, the proportion of people that recover, also based on that. So let me continue with this then and go to the next slide. Here in the left panel is essentially a bunch of parameters that we estimated or that we move as our modulate our epidemic. So I put it as information, but it's really not very, it's a large list of numbers. But the difference is here in the right panel, in which I have the holidays that we have in Mexico, where activities stopped in different degrees, but stop. First, we start with the first case, which was 28. It depends on, since we did this by state in Mexico, we have 32 states. So we did it in the 32 states. So the first case in each state changed. The start of the MPIs was a federal instruction, so everybody started on 23rd. And then we started the national holidays, these Children's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Independence Day, Day of the Dead, Buen Fin, this is like the Black Friday in the United States, Day of the Virgin Guadalupe, which is a big thing here, Christmas, New Year, Wise Men, the holidays of Holy Week, Valentine's Day, Easter, Children's, and so forth. So we have many, and each state has difference, and so we collected all this data and introduced it in our model. Respect to vaccines, we have Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, CanSino, Sputnik, Sinovac. My wife and I have 2 of Pfizer, 1 of AstraZeneca, but depending where you live, and in the city and in the country, you can have Sputnik with Sinovac, CanSino with Sputnik, Moderna with AstraZeneca, Pfizer. It's really complicated. And in many of these, we know the efficacy of the vaccine, but in the CanSino case, for example, we don't know anything about that. We have guesses and and things like that, but we are applying it. There is no open database for vaccination, so we still working with case reports and death reports. The order of the vaccination was from the oldest to the youngest, except people from 5 to 70 years of age, which was not vaccinated, and it took more than a year to complete 3 doses for the whole population in these age classes. So we have at most 70% effective coverage, which is far from any idea of herd immunity that we can achieve. So we have a problem, but this is it. In Mexico is practically open. Here, all academic activity is there. They ended in open air, I mean, in the outside, the use of masks, and the restaurants, everything is open and with full capacity. So this is our situation. We only hope that no new variant arises, because then we will have a big problem. Then we estimated the rate of vaccination, just simply looking at the percentage of people that government reported vaccinated, the time it took to achieve that coverage, and from that, we just assuming an exponential residence time, we estimated the vaccination rate. These are the fits of the model using this key calendar dates idea for Mexico City, for Querétaro, which is 250 miles north of Mexico, for Sonora, which is a state in the northwest of Mexico. It is the home of the most of the untouched Sonora Desert. It borders with Arizona. And Quintana Roo, which is in Yucatan Peninsula in the far east of Mexico. So the fit was reasonable, very good, using these ideas of key calendar days. All this was used with Bayesian statistics. And now this is Peru. As you can see, Peru has as many, perhaps more, holidays than Mexico, but we are more or less the same. And actually, Latin America is like this. And we just use these calendar dates to adjust the contact rate, as I said before, using as a baseline the relative changes of the contact rate in 2020. And these are the estimations. Again, just the fit is reasonable. And here we have Arequipa, Cusco, Lima, and Piura in a gradient from north to south. So just to have the whole range of latitudes in our data, in our simulations. And now I'm going to show you the estimations, the projections that we achieved with this. This is the evolution, the projections, 1 week of Quintana Roo state. And so it depends, since we are going advancing in the calendar day, we started in June. So we first cut in June, then we cut the data on July, then we cut the data in August, and September, October, November. We didn't follow beyond November because then Omicron hit, and then the model just useless. It doesn't work. But before, it is reasonable, given the limitations that we have. The better judges are the colleagues, pairs, but we thought it was good. So blue is the data the model used. Green, but red are the projections with the strongest red, the most likely scenario, the lighter red, the less likely scenario, and the green dots are the actual data that we obtained from the epidemic. So as you can see, well, in June it worked well, in July also, in August it caught the tendency, but not quite well, then in September quite well, in October very well, and in November very well. This is Quintana Roo, it worked. This is Mexico City, where things start to complicate. This is a case, we are putting one case in which it worked very well, one case in which more or less, and one case in which didn't work. So the same thing we got in June, July, August, September, October, same code, the red, the lighter red, less probable, higher, more intense red, higher, more probable, and the green dots are the data obtained just before the real data, just put in the projections. So you can see there are, for example, here in C, in August, it didn't work at all. In E, which is October, same thing. And essentially it failed, but in June and July, it worked reasonable well. Then we go to, this is Querétaro state in the center of Mexico. Again, you have rather good estimation, except in the, when we got the data to August. So the epidemic is something that changes, right? It changes very much. It depends on many, many factors. So some months, the model works with this assumption. In others, there are certainly, that's our, what we think, violations to the principle of periodic, of this repetition of the patterns of last year from the to the next one, and it fails. And when it comes the variant, of course, it fails because with the variant, the super spreading events were everywhere, not only in the holidays, so it doesn't work. And this is Sonora state in the northern Mexico. I'm not going to overwhelm you with descriptions very detailed. You can see by yourselves if it is good or bad. There it is. And this is our attempt to forecasting. Well, forecasting is a problem, but perhaps for the quality of data that we have in Mexico, we need something more. And for the public that we wanted to reach the general public, and the government helped us with that, to the general problem, to understand the importance of taking care of oneself to avoiding risk of contagion. And for that, we used two models that of other people, but we adapted them to Mexico, the case of the country. This is the first one was COVID-STEAM. COVID-STEAM is a model. We started to try to construct a probabilistic model, and then one of my students found in late August 2020 a page on the Harvard School of Public Health and a model which is COVID-STEAM. This is the credit for them. This is their model. But this model is not a Kerr-McCaffrey model. Is a model much more robust and apt for epidemics, I think, for the uses we want to put in the epidemics. Kerr-McCaffrey are very good for theoretical things and some estimations, in my opinion, but these models are much more robust for the practical needs of everyday life in public health. That's an opinion. And then COVID-STEAM has a different approach to modeling epidemics. It's based on transmission, the natural history of the disease, and the path of diagnosis. So it selects, it's essentially three parts. It concedes from the beginning that some things we cannot detect, we have to estimate. Asymptomatic, symptomatic people, severe cases, and death, depending on the county in the United States and the country in the world. These can be many or few, but essentially no detection. Then some of these guys, we can detect the symptomatic essentially as some of the people that die because they die in the hospitals, and the symptomatic are symptomatic. And all these things are based on observation. And those observations in most of the world are reported cases and reported deaths. Then they observe that the no detection, in order to estimate these guys that are not detected, there are delays. For the detection, not only delays, but very incomplete. These are the first symptomatic cases and deaths, the first elements of the natural history of the disease that can be deduced from the reported cases and reported deaths. This has to do with incomplete data, and from that we go here. And the model is based on the calculation and postulation of probability distributions for diagnostic symptomatic, diagnostic severe, delays in diagnostic, and all these things that you can read there by yourselves. The paper is here. It's a med-archive paper, but very interesting, I think, and the model to us worked very well. We don't have this because we don't have contact trace. I'm not going to repeat this thing. We have many limitations, but some of the distributions we can compute with the data. For example, symptomatics, the probability distribution of symptomatic given infection, severe given symptomatic, death if severe, death is symptomatic. All these we can construct from the data, and we construct them. We have our many students working with us using the statistics and all these very interesting uses of statistics, and particular Bayesian statistics here. So we have fun estimating these probabilities, and then this is the result of the model. The fit of the model is much better than, in our opinion, than the Kerman-McKendrick models that we used. We can estimate the severe cases. These severe cases are not put into the model; they are estimated, and the COVID team makes a very good job estimating severe cases. Then we can estimate the total number of symptomatic cases. We don't have testing, so this is a very useful information. We can estimate the total number of cases, symptomatic and asymptomatic, that we have really in the country. This yellow line is the estimation of the different outbreaks and the evolution of the epidemic. I'm plotting here the whole epidemic for the total number of cases. And then we have the Corey's way of computing the RT, which is in gray, and the method that COVID team uses using splines and different ideas, but for estimating the same number, so they more or less go together, although sometimes are differences. But this is the information we have. And what is the use we can give to this information? To compute risk, the risk of contagion. And this is we use the ideas of the group of Joshua Bites. We use the definition they have of risk of contagion. And the problem are the active cases. I have a brief interchange with Joshua, and the question was, how do you estimate your total number of active cases? And my answer was COVID team. So using this probabilistic model, we use the data, the results of the model, to compute the total number of cases, and with that, we estimate the total number of active cases. As you know, in many places, you multiply by 3 the number of cases, or by 5, or by 8, this ascertainment ratio that is computed based on the measurements, the testing, the contact tracing that you have in a given country. We don't have that, so we use COVID team. COVID team, in Mexico, there is only one study on seroprevalence that was published in August 2020. And COVID team gave a very close estimation of this field study with people that the government published. So that gave us confidence on COVID team. That's our only data point that we have, but we didn't have anything else. I don't think in the country anybody had better than us, which is not much to say, but that's it. And we use that for estimating the risk of computation. Well, the interpretation of this, you know what it is. The probability of encounter with at least one sick person, then 1 minus p, the probability of encountering no sick persons, then the probability of not encountering a sick persons in a group of n, and the risk, right? That you can compute very quickly using these ideas. So that was the use of the models. Then we were excited. We started to build these matrices that show for Querétaro State, where I live, where the university where I am is located. So all the municipalities, I think there are 16, and then in the different weeks, how in this case the risk of contagion, which described before, is changing. And this was given in maps, and this in this heat map, and we constructed a dashboard with our means, because we didn't have support, of course, but we did it with our students, and it was working until about 1 month ago, which we was no longer needed. And then this is it. And then luckily in about March last year, the Secretary of Education of Querétaro approached our group. We started to talk, and he was worried about the return to classes. And when the order was given in about July last year, we were ready. and we provided the state with the risk table. This is a dashboard constructed by the government, but this is our data, and it was very complete. It was given the number of active cases, the number of people dying, the ages in which it happened, also the ages in the student class, in the students that were at risk, and deaths in the student classes, what happened last week, given some indication. This is in Spanish, but it's saying which municipality has the highest risk, the middle risk, the lowest risk. How can you read this table? And then this was here it says risk of contagion high, and this is for the municipality of El Marqués. This is we gave the interpretation of this risk. They gave the recommendations about going back to classes. They published the schools that were the different risks depending on where they were located in the municipality. And we gave an indicator. The 78 is the risk, the Joshua White's risk, computed with COVID STEAM, and saying it was high, in this case, very high. And these instructions were used by the government to give the instruction of opening, partial closure, or full closure of schools. So it was a highly charged political problem. There were many insults interchanged, but fortunately we were behind the scenes. We were just computing a risk. We were the responsible for this number, but the ones fighting for it was the Secretary of State of the Secretary of Education, and that was the story. And just to finish, just well, as a theoretician that I think I am, this was very interesting. And then what one student thought of this, and this is just as a conclusion. This is the phase plane, I like to call it, of risk and reproductive number for Mexico City, Oaxaca, Baja California, and Yucatan, the peninsula of Yucatan. And this is risk, and this is RT for the, I don't remember, until October, from the beginning of the pandemic to October 31st last year. We have all the data. I didn't have time to plot the new things, but this is the typical trajectories of Mexico City and all these states I mentioned in the RT risk plane. It's very intriguing. I think there must be something behind this here. You can also plot RT versus the case fatality ratio, and you also have very interesting orbits here in this plane, but I just plotted risk. And it has a practical use because you can then construct a panel that this was given only to the Secretary of Education, in which you can divide low risk, low RT, high RT, low risk, high, both of them high risk and RT, and here low RT, high risk. And you can see all the municipalities in Querétaro moving essentially in a counterclockwise direction during the whole epidemic. So you don't need a model to predict. You just look where is the majority of the municipalities and how many of them are crossing either this or this line, and you can predict qualitatively, but with high accuracy, that you have a coming rise in cases and a problem with the epidemic. This was great. You can see here, for example, low, this is the best cases, one of the downs that had the epidemic, but in these times, before Omicron, already 2 municipalities were already with high reproductive number. So there is kind of an inertia, right? You have many cases, many active cases, even if R not reduces, you still are a high risk of, and it takes some time in order to be the cases to reduce and go down this direction. And then you can explain the counterclockwise movement of things using this. Finally, just quickly, because I think my time has run out, I mean, I'm not going to bother you with this. Well, put there just the problem in Mexico was that we have a very popular president, independent of political things. He's popular. Opposition parties are weak. There is a political vacuum of opposition to counter whatever the government said during the epidemic. And they decided to have their mathematical model, official one, no attempt to integrate team of experts of the country or anywhere else, and the model failed. So the causes are many. I'm not going to say many things about that, but what happened is that we have scientific reporting, newspapers for science, only in the beginning of its development. So most of the reporters that report on science were people that were reporting political events or sports, and suddenly they were assigned to report science. And this term science as scientific were used to disqualify criticism. And then a very interesting phenomenon occurred is that the newspapers became scientific journals. Many, at least 3 models were published in the Universal and Excelsior, which are papers, good papers for other things, but in terms of science, is very, very, very far from New York Times or Washington Post or anything like that, really very far. So this is the story I wanted to tell you. I just want to thank my team. These are my young collaborators, the statisticians, my students that were essential for this, the support from National University. The COVID team lasts 2 days in running, so the university provides free of charge the use of Labis, which is the laboratory in Querétaro for high performance computing. Support from, in terms of, depends on the time, CONACYT, because many of these people are financed by, their salaries are financed by CONACYT, the University of Sonora, IMAS, Instituto of Matemáticas, coordination of the scientific investigation, the General Epidemiology Directorate of the government, and the state of Querétaro. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope it was not too boring and maybe interesting. And thank you very much. And I'm ready for questions if you have one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a very, very interesting talk. We have time for some questions and answers. I see John Hong has his hand up. John Hong?
Oh, yes, thank you. First, I want to thank you again, Jorge, for the interesting talk. And, you know, I noticed that you allowed to be recorded. So I really like your comments by the end of your talk about the politics and science.
Yeah.
But not, yes. And the views of the world of scientific and science.
Yes,
yes. The second, the real question is, when you talk about at a certain stage, you assume the relative change is the same before the first and second wave. I agree with that. Mm-hmm. But do you also assume those vaccinated will have the same behavior change? Is the first wave?
That was a main, very important question. The problem is that we don't have data on how vaccination progressed in when they were vaccinated. I was able to, due to personal relations with one authority in the epidemiology department, to have some data, but data was not curated, was rough. And we have people that, according to the date of birth, they had 120 years old. And what happens is that the people, in order to get vaccinated, for example, they record to falsifications of addresses, of age. They use the data from old relatives that are already dead and things like that. So it was a lot of noise in the data. So we decided to go only for the daily reports of coverage and to estimate a vaccination rate with that and plug it into the model and let the model progress based on report cases and deaths. And the rest, whatever was estimated using this data with these assumptions. as I said, I acknowledge fully, totally that we have a lot of questionable hypotheses for constructing these models. But we don't have enough information for doing a better thing. We are fighting for that, well, okay, you didn't release the data on time, but what if you let us have the data afterwards, just to see how it went, what happened, etc. But your criticism, Yang Hong, is totally correct. We are making a lot of abuses maybe on the hypothesis, but that's it.
Thank you. It's not criticism. It's just notice that it's one of the kind of frontier, really how to really detect behavior changes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions or comments? So I was curious, that last graph you showed with the risk and reproduction number. That's pretty interesting, especially the existence of cycles. Yeah. And I think you were trying to explain that. Can you tell me again, why is that? How do we interpret the existence of cycles?
What happens? Yeah, for example, you are here. This is the region of high risk and low RT. So here you have the dynamics of the epidemics is going this way. Let me share it. It's bigger.
So when RT goes down.
So what you have is that RT goes down.
Yeah.
But the number of the cases, the active cases, which is many millions or perhaps hundreds of thousands of people. So for those, these are computed as those people 14 from the day of today to 14 days back are considered as active using the model. So that mass of people has, we say, certain inertia. So it takes time to clear them from infection. And so you can have a lowering RT, but it's still high risk. So later on, obviously, the RT is low, so new infections are few. And then the active cases like lose mass and start to go down again, and then you have low risk. But then the infection can start, and then you have a high case infection, the rate of infection increases, so you have an increase of new cases, but not enough to have large number of active cases. That comes later, and then you move to this side of the graph. I think we have it in this red. And then you get here, and then you have large RT and low risk, but the risk is building up. So it goes up, and then you have later going up. And then you have the worst situation, which is high risk, high RT. And the cycle essentially repeats itself. There are, as you can see in this side, some cases in which, especially in the highest, in the peaks, in which the municipalities are very close to the center or moving only in two of the panels. But in general, you can see that the movement is in this sense that I described, and the explanation we postulate is the one that I just repeated here.
It's interesting because we have similar graphs, similar dynamics, but plotting different. It's not risk versus a reproduction number. We have a model in which we plot. Sorry, there's some. There's a fire alarm going in my apartment, so you might hear some noise. Okay. So we have graphs where we're plotting cases with the rate of increase of cases.
Oh, okay.
And we plot that, and it does exactly the same thing. You get cycles. We also divided it into a quadrant where we label one quadrant as low risk, and it's warming up, high risk, and cooling down. And it does exactly that. You get cycles. I think there's more of these pairs of parameters that we need to understand, try to study from a dynamical system perspective.
Right. Actually, you can put a third direction, because we found that risk, reproduction number, and case fatality rate have a very interesting cycles, but in 3 dimensions. Actually, if you plot RT against versus case fatality ratio, you get similar cycles, but you plot the three, you have a very nice three-dimensional orbits going there with complicated dynamics that we also are trying to understand. It's a mystery, but yes, and I'm glad you said also the rate of increase. We'll look into that. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jacques,
thank you so much.
Jacques, you have your hand up?
Yes, very nice, Jorge. I have a question about this. I have a question about these oscillations. This is not a reflection of the contact rate going up and down.
This data is obtained from this. The risk is the total number of cases with the, in this case, we are not modeling the contact rate. We are just fitting the data.
Yeah. So is it possible that this is an observation that people are adjusting their behavior as a function of
it could be because
the actual reproduction number? And
yeah, it could be because you see this is the path of the reproduction number. We're using the blue one to plot those graphs, and obviously, as I showed before, obviously is related to the heightened activity or lowering the activity of the population and therefore infection. And I have to plot these things because I have not done this for the Omicron waves. Let's see if there is a qualitative change in the dynamics that we observe here. But definitively is related to the changes in contact rate. This is RT, but also in the risk behavior, which means how many people is active at that time. And that may be related to how cautious or not cautious is people in taking care of themselves, because that reflects in the number of people infected, right?
So it could be the operational global implementation of behavior adjustments
it could
as
be
the reproduction rate or risk. And you basically, if risk is higher, you become more cautious, which brings the reproduction number down, and then you're okay, you go out again, then reproduction goes up.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, that should be, that's a way of explaining this thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was very nice from the northern Latin America.
Yeah. yes, Latin America.
Okay, very good. Do we have any other comments or questions? Don't think so, but once again, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Let's stay in touch and exchange our findings.
Thank you, Kumar. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Jack, Jan Juan, and everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.